Hi, this is Rod Meldrum, the Book of Mormon evidence guy, and I'm excited about this week's episode and Come Follow Me. We are doing Come Follow Me supplemental, and as you can see, I have with me a special guest in studio here. We have Jonathan Neville, who requires no
introduction, except to say that I'm delighted to be here with you.
That's right. And so we are excited about what we're going to be doing different this time. I'll tell you about in just a second, but just to begin with, this is the first time you've seen now in our podcast the Come Follow Me manual, basically lesson for this manual, year, the lesson manual here. And as you can see here, sporting on the front of the manual is a wonderful, beautiful image of Christ, but kind of off to this back behind him is a nice Mesoamerican stone pyramid temple, which are not mentioned in the Book of Mormon, but anyway.
Right.
But I just want to give a quick shout out to the people who make the manuals, basically, because some people we've had some complaints. People say, "Wait a minute, they're pushing the Mesoamerica thing again."
Yeah.
Now, hold on, everybody. let's just get this a little bit more straight. So, also throughout the manual, there are things like this painting here. That the church has been in kind of a conundrum. Actually, yeah, why don't you hold that? The church has been in a little bit of a conundrum because there's a lot of people who believe in the Mesoamerican theory, and I think there's a lot more people who believe in the Heartland information, but nevertheless, they are trying to kind of have some of both. And you'll see that actually in the Book of Mormon videos the church has been making. You'll see some scenes that look more kind of Mesoamerican, some scenes that are pretty clearly Heartland. But this painting, I love this painting, by the way. In fact, I love it so much I actually bought a copy. A few years ago, actually, I've had this for quite a while, and I want to pull this out here for just a second. Put this here, but this is actually this is from Clark Kelly Price, is the artist, and he did this painting, and it's called "It's True, Sir, All Present and Accounted For," and this is talking about the 2,000 stripling warriors here. And interestingly, when Clark Kelly Price did this painting. He actually got Native American subjects to paint from. So all of the faces that you'll see on these, the 2,000 stripling warriors, are actual Native Americans. And it's clearly, this is not a Mesoamerican setting. There's no palm trees or stone pyramids in the background or whatever. And it basically looks like, more of a Heartland scene. So anyway, a little shout out to Clark Kelly Price for this painting, and also to the church education department that actually used a painting that's more clearly Heartland for the manual this year. So don't be getting upset about anything with that. It's a huge improvement actually from previous manuals where it was 100% Mesoamerica, showing Mesoamerican scenes and so forth. So yeah. Hey, anyway, so let's get on with this. So. What's going to be different about this? Well, we are, for the first time, as you know, we had our Come Follow Me that we did 4 years ago.
2020.
And there's like 65 different people who are making Come Follow Me programs now. But the information that we put out 4 years ago is still all valid. And we thought, well, rather than doing something that's basically doing the same thing kind of over again or repackaging that, what we decided to do is actually to go deeper. Many of the people in our the people who follow our research and that kind of thing, they love going deep, and that's what we like to do as well. So that's what we're going to be doing. So in order to do that, so about 15 years ago, surprisingly,
it's a long time ago,
I came out with this set of DVDs called Book of Mormon Evidence. It was the first set of DVDs, about like 9 long hours. It was a beast to get through it. But the bottom line is that it had 5 different DVDs in here. And it had from prophecies and promises to Joseph New to DNA evidences and so forth, and then archaeological correlations, and then also the geography itself. So how does this all fit? And this was kind of my first foray into it. Back in 2009 is when we came out with this. So it's been about 15 years ago, and it's interesting because as I've gone back through this, there's been so much more information.
A ton, yeah.
And I've said many times that when I started doing this research that people a lot smarter than me are going to come along that are going to help flesh out this information and give it additional research. And one of those people I am proud to be sitting here next to with Jonathan Neville here because when I did this DVD 15 years ago, I had a certain level of information, but there's just so much more.
Yeah.
And so rather than do an update and make another DVD that nobody even has DVD players anymore, so that doesn't make any sense to update the DVD. Instead, we're going to do this as a podcast, and it's going to be really fun because what we're going to do is we're going to actually play the video, so you'll see what I had 15 years ago, and then we're going to be stopping and making additional commentary and go into depth in some of these areas where it was there's been just so much more new research. So if that's the case, then let's buckle up and let's do it. So
let's go. So
this is going to be Joseph New. A couple quick things. You can find this on YouTube. On our YouTube channel, you can find the original one, and then also you'll be able to find this one.
Right.
This is probably going to be a long one because
probably.
There's a lot to it. We're going to go in real depth. I know that I've been told so many times that Gen X and Gen Z and millennials and so forth, they just can't handle more than about 15 or 20 minutes of a DVD or something. But then they come out with these films that are 3 hours long, and they don't seem to have a problem with that. This is not going to be as entertaining as that, although it might be.
It'll be more entertaining.
It may be more entertaining, and you'll learn a lot more than you'll get from some Hollywood video or Hollywood movie that's 3 hours long, and you walk away going, wow, that was awesome graphics, but I didn't really learn anything of any importance.
Right.
So with that in mind, what we're going to do is we're going to start the video. As we get through different places, then we'll stop and make commentary. And I am so excited to have you guys share in what Jonathan has been bringing out for all these years. And I've learned more. He's learned more. We both have so much more. Are you ready to go deep? Because that's where we're going, folks.
Okay.
Let's go.
Let's do it.
By the way, this first video was actually made by Jonathan Ilguth.
Oh yeah?
He's son-in-law of Dean Sessions, actually.
Oh, okay.
He did the original thing. We actually used the Creative Media Works and so forth there in Provo to shoot it.
It's been my opportunity over the last 33 years to study the life of the prophet Joseph Smith. As an epic historian, I have an opportunity to study a very small little window of LDS church history, and I've elected over these many years to go 1805 to 1844. And so I have been about everywhere that the prophet Joseph Smith ever hung his hat. And it's been my opportunity to do a lot of on-site research and develop an awful lot of interesting theories with regards to the life of the prophet Joseph Smith. I'm going to share a few thoughts with you over the next few minutes with regards to some of the more significant things the prophet Joseph did. Over the last many years, 10, 15 years, I've had the opportunity through a number of travel agencies here in the Valley to take interested groups of LDS individuals to these sacred church history sites. With my knowledge and understanding of the prophet Joseph, I've been able to introduce them to Joseph the man, Joseph the father, the husband, Joseph the prophet. But in so doing, I have formulated a real different opinion of the prophet Joseph than perhaps I had 30 years ago. I have a degree in archaeology and anthropology, and with that degree, over the last 50 years, I have been taught, educated, the concept that the Book of Mormon geography was in Mesoamerica, South America. I have had a struggle over the last 10 years accepting that as I visited these sacred church history sites and having researched Joseph Smith and his contemporaries and those who called him friend. The prophet Joseph Smith did not speak of the Book of Mormon being in Mesoamerica or South America ever. And in fact, just the opposite. I take groups to these sites and I try and make them a very significant and spiritual experience for these people. As we stand on the hill Cumorah, looking out into the valleys below, into Cumorah land, we make them very, very spiritual as we talk about the potential that these areas, in fact, might be the very areas the Book of Mormon peoples walked long ago. As I got to know Rod, I was pleased to find out that there are a group of people out there. There is an enormous amount of material relative to the geography of the Book of Mormon being right here in North America. as I got to know Rod and those who worked with him and started to read, to study, to ponder and pray the materials that he had put together, it became very, very clear to me that the way I had felt for over 10 years in my introduction to these sacred sites, to those who joined me on my trips, was validated. That there is some truth to the things I was feeling and some truth to the things I was sharing with others. I've had an opportunity now to meet with Rod on a number of occasions and to be a part of some of his research, reviewing some of the data that he's collected, the research that he's put together, he and others. And I'm pleased to say that I am very, very happy to have been a part of all of this and very pleased with the material as I've read through it. It's been my opportunity to check for the historical accuracy of the material relative to the prophet Joseph. And in so doing, I have found that they're right on the mark, that there are no discrepancies, there are no issues that they have presented that are not taken truthfully out of the text, the original text itself. I am here to endorse it 100%. If you'll take the time to ponder, to study, to reflect, and to pray about the materials that you've seen and that you will see or that you may study relative to this topic, I think you'll find that your testimony relative to the prophet Joseph Smith, the Book of Mormon, its geography, its people, is going to be very, very meaningful to you. That as you visit these sacred sites, that you'll understand and appreciate their significance. And in so doing, your testimonies will grow, that you'll have a greater understanding of the Book of Mormon, its truths, and its reality.
Interesting to note that Kay and I have remained good friends for all of these years, last 15 years, and he's just amazing. But he also, more recently, he was serving a mission there in
Sharon, Vermont.
Sharon, Vermont, and actually you went to see him, didn't you?
I did, yeah. I went to visit him when he was on his mission there, and I gave him a copy. Should I show?
Yeah.
Okay. I actually gave him a copy of this annotated Book of Mormon when he was on his mission. And many of you may know that my wife and I bought a house in Palmyra, and we lived out there off and on for a few years. And one of the reasons was I wanted to experience the things that Kay was just talking about, some of these sacred sites. I also have a lot of affinity with Kay because his story and mine are very similar. I went to BYU. I knew John Sorensen and the Meso guys, and I was totally convinced that the Book of Mormon took place in Mesoamerica. Yeah. And then some years ago, I wrote a novel about Native Americans reclaiming their land under their treaties. And a guy who read it,
isn't it?
You might have that here. Yeah, that's
right
the
here.
one. Yeah,
Right
it was called The Rule of Equity. and one of the readers of this said, "Hey, have you ever heard of Rod Meldrum?" And I said, "No," and he was a friend of yours. And so he said, "Well, you need to meet Rod Meldrum because he knows a lot about Native Americans." And so I went to one of Rod's presentations and afterwards struck up a conversation. And Rod said, "Well, if you want to really know about this, you need to come on a tour." And I thought, many of you know too that I've traveled all around the world for business and things, but I've never been to Ohio.
In fact, I can hardly even keep up to you even today.
Okay,
but Mauritius and China and all over the place. It's awesome.
But I've never been to Ohio, and I thought that sounds interesting.
Flyover district.
Yeah, you're right. Flyover country for sure. So I went on a tour with Rod, and Wayne May was the other tour leader.
Yeah.
And like
Shout
Kay
out to
said,
Wayne.
yeah, shout out to Wayne for sure.
Yeah.
But my mind was blown because he took us to these museums where you see the head plates and the breastplates and all the things described right in the Book of Mormon. And I had never heard of this before. And so towards the end of the tour, I had to actually leave a day early because I had another commitment. But towards the end, I said...
I remember leaving him off at some side road. I don't know.
Yeah, the bus driver took me off at a train station in East St. Louis, man. It was... Anyway.
Scary.
It was pretty wild. But I asked Rod, well, how do we end up with all this Mesoamerican stuff? Because this all seems so obvious in North America. And that's where he brought up a topic we'll talk about in a little while here in the video.
Exactly.
But so what Kay said about having been taught the Mesoamerican thing was totally my experience as well. And it wasn't until I learned really about church history and about some of the things that we'll be talking about today that I totally changed my mind. And I hear that story over and over and over. Because now that you got me into this, I've been doing presentations and firesides and things, and
all
people
over. In France and all over the place, all over the world.
In Europe and other countries. And so people come up to me and ask me the same thing. How did we ever get in the Mesoamerica? So I tell them my story. And it all kind of flows from there.
And you even have books that you've written about that.
Well, to answer the questions that I had. Yeah,
because
exactly.
that is a question that people have asked. Well, why did we go down that road for so many years, thinking it's in Central America?
Yeah.
And
Well, we'll talk about that in the video here. So,
exactly.
So
all right.
Continue on, right?
We'll continue on. So.
Okay.
What did Joseph Smith actually know about Book of Mormon geography? That was the next big question that I had in doing this research, is I wanted to find out, well, what did Joseph Smith understand? Now, in doing this research, I used a hierarchy of evidence. It's important to establish, because you're going to find
don't forget
that things don't correlate with each other, that don't match up. And so you have to determine which type of evidence is stronger or more robust evidence than other types of evidence. So this is my hierarchy that I personally established in doing my research on the subject material. And that evidence then will help us to understand where we have more strength, where the evidence is more robust versus other evidence, because sometimes the evidence doesn't always just match up. What I did in my personal research is I used Joseph Smith's recorded revelations first and foremost, because Joseph Smith is the only prophet in this dispensation who actually claimed to have received revelation on this matter, using divinely received revelations to modern-day prophets. Now, normally in my life, those two would be switched around. Obviously, a modern-day prophet revelation supersedes the revelations of previous prophets. But in this particular case, no modern-day prophet has, at this point, has claimed to have had received revelation on the matter of geography of the Book of Mormon. Then we use Joseph Smith's written words. Now, when they're written words, it also matters whether they are in Joseph Smith's own handwriting or if somebody else wrote them, and also were they signed or not. Conference talks by modern prophets and apostles are also very good sources of evidence. Corroborated writings and journals of others. In other words, if we have multiple accounts or multiple people who are saying the same thing happened, then that also is strong evidence. First-hand accounts written shortly after the event are preferred over ones that were written after or long after the event. Historical compilations providing background information are also important. Personal communications of prophets and apostles. Uncorroborated second, third-hand accounts. When you have documents that are not signed, for example, when we don't know who the writer was, those are poor evidence. Evidence based on theoretical assumptions or ideas are probably the worst kind of evidence, of course. We want to try to avoid those. In order to do this historical research properly, we need to start off with the idea that we're going to use those things that have the strongest evidence as our primary evidence, and then second-hand accounts and so forth, while they might support a first-hand account, can't be used as a primary account. Some people said, well, anything that a prophet says is gospel, right? This is actually from Bruce R. McConkie. It was originally published in January of 1973, and it was reprinted again in the New Era, September of 2007. It's called Ordinary Men, Extraordinary Callings. With all their inspiration and greatness, prophets are yet mortal men, with imperfections common to mankind in general. They have their opinions and prejudices and are left to work out their problems without inspiration in many instances. Joseph Smith, in fact, recorded that he visited with a brother and sister from Michigan who thought that a prophet is always a prophet. But I told them that a prophet was a prophet only when he was acting as such. Thus, the opinions and views even of a prophet may contain error unless those opinions and views were inspired by the Spirit. Inspired scripture or statements should be accepted as such. Prophets are men, and when they act by the Spirit of inspiration, what they say is the voice of God. But still they are mortal, and they are entitled to and do have private opinions. Let's talk about some of the more powerful evidences where it's Joseph Smith claiming to have received revelation, wrote it down, and put his name to it, and in regard to the geography of the Book of Mormon. This is from the Wentworth letter, which is accepted as one of the strongest, most robust evidences. We have the original source documents and so forth. And most of us are aware of the Wentworth letter, portions of which were actually canonized into Scripture. In the Wentworth letter, Joseph wrote this: on the evening of the 21st of September of 1823, while I was praying unto God and endeavoring to exercise faith in the precious promises of the Scripture, on a sudden, a light like that of day, only a far purer and more glorious appearance and brightness, burst into the room. Indeed, the first sight was as though the house was filled with consuming fire. In a moment, a personage stood before me, surrounded with a glory yet greater than that which I had already been surrounded. This messenger proclaimed himself to be an angel of God, sent to bring the joyful tidings that the covenant which God made with ancient Israel was at hand to be fulfilled. What was Joseph Smith having here? He wasn't just having a vision, he was actually having a visitation. Joseph continued, this messenger proclaimed himself to be an angel of God, sent to bring the joyful tidings that the covenant which God made with ancient Israel was at hand to be fulfilled, that the preparatory work of the second coming of the Messiah was speedily to commence, that the time was at hand for the gospel in all of its fullness to be preached in power unto all nations, that a people might be prepared for the millennial reign. I was informed that I was chosen to be an instrument in the hands of God to bring about some of his purposes in this glorious dispensation. I was also informed concerning the aboriginal inhabitants of this country, and shown who they were and from whence they came, a brief sketch of their origin, their progress, their civilization, their laws, their governments. Now I find it interesting that Joseph Smith used the term this country. He said that he was informed concerning the aboriginal inhabitants of this country. What country is Joseph Smith in at the time? He was in the United States, of course. He said that he was shown who they were, where they came from. If he knew their progress and he knew their civilization and he knew their governments and he knew down to their very laws, what are the chances that Joseph Smith did not have any idea about where this may have occurred? Joseph continued, the remnant are the Indians that now inhabit this country. Remember the demonstratives. What country is Joseph Smith in? It's the country that is near to him, that is in proximity of him as a speaker. This book also tells us that our Savior made his appearance upon this continent after his resurrection. There's what is known as a sense of place. Those of you who may have had the privilege of going back and visiting these sacred sites where the angel Moroni met with Joseph Smith, go back and visit these places and see the cabin where this occurred. And this is the very room where the angel Moroni appeared to the prophet Joseph Smith as a boy. Many people have not heard of this account, but it's the American revivalist.
Say about the Wentworth letter, there's a lot of additional information that's come out.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, let's see. This is really fascinating to me. and you can see it in the Joseph Smith papers, you can see this. But the Wentworth letter was Joseph adopted from a pamphlet that Orson Pratt had written in 1840. And you can do a side-by-side comparison and see that much of what is in the Wentworth letter is taken directly from Orson Pratt's pamphlet. But at one point, Orson Pratt went on for 2 or 3 pages talking about all the natives in Central America. He specifically said Central America. And at that point, Joseph Smith deleted all of that. And that's when that statement that the remnant are the Indians that live in this country, that's where that is. So when you look at it side by side, you can see it's not just a random statement that Joseph made. He's explicitly refuting what Orson Pratt said about the natives in Central America.
That's really important. In fact, I had somebody just recently in a podcast interview that I was on ask me, what was the origins of the Wentworth letter? And I was wishing that you were there to explain it to them. Where did the Wentworth letter come from?
Well, that's where it was.
Great.
And you can, in the Joseph Smith papers, if you look up the Wentworth letter, they have a note. And they say that they included Orson Pratt's pamphlet because it was a source material for it. But they don't do the side-by-side comparison. So I had to do that myself, and I have it on my blogs and in my books and stuff. Because when you read side-by-side, it tracks, and then all the Central American stuff's kicked out. And Joseph says, basically, he's saying, Orson Pratt's wrong. The remnant are the Indians that live in this country. And
that is so powerful.
It's
Jonathan,
huge.
Because
it's huge.
that changes everything as far as what we know from about what Joseph Smith's position was when he's actually taking affirmative action against what Orson Pratt said.
Yeah, exactly. Another aspect of it that's really interesting, you know, at the first part it said it was the Aborigines of this country, right? Well, originally that came from, or I don't know, it came from that, but Oliver Cowdery had written these 8 letters, these church history essays, and in letter number 4, he referred to that. He said that he said, first off, describing Moroni's visit, he said, Joseph can't tell me exactly what time it was when he came, but it was after everybody had gone to bed. So he was getting this directly from Joseph Smith, and he was asking Joseph questions, like, what time of night did Moroni come? And Joseph says, I can't remember, but it was after everybody was in bed. Well, in that passage, he quotes Moroni saying just this, that it was the record of the Aborigines of this country. But he also told Joseph Smith that the record was written and deposited not far from his house in Palmyra. In other words, Mormon and Moroni lived around Palmyra in western New York. And that's a quotation from Moroni. So it's not something someone later invented. And that reappears in the Wentworth letter, in Joseph's Wentworth letter, when he says it was the Aborigines of this country. It's that same phrasing that Oliver Cowdery had written back in 1835. So those are 2 elements of the Wentworth letter that are quite interesting. And then, of course, the Wentworth letter also talks about the translation, which we'll get to later. Yeah, we're going to get into that in a lot more detail.
Yeah. There's a couple other questions I have, though, about the Wentworth letter. So I've seen the church in publications and so forth have used the Wentworth letter, and they go right up to a certain point, and then all of a sudden they just delete. Yeah,
that was in the lesson manual. Yeah, it was in the Teachings of the Prophets. It was several years ago now. They did one each year. They did a manual for the teachings of the president of the church, and they did one on Joseph Smith, and they had an entire chapter on the Wentworth letter. And in that chapter, if you notice, well, at the beginning of the Wentworth letter, we should emphasize this. Joseph Smith wrote to Mr. Wentworth, he says, I don't want you to change anything in this letter, right? Well, he didn't know about the correlation department, because the correlation department didn't publish the whole Wentworth letter. They put in, they took excerpts out of it, and they just left in ellipses that are very misleading. And so the part that you have it here, the part that they took out.
This is in the annotated edition of the Book of Mormon, which hopefully you all have a copy of that, so you can be able to follow along with this year as we go through this. But this is on page 551 in the annotated Book of Mormon.
Yeah.
I think this is the part that was Book of Mormon translated the record of the gift and power of God. It's an important, interesting book. The history.
Well, they took out the important part that they took out was where Joseph said the remnant are the Indians that now inhabit this country. They just took it out of the Wentworth letter. And it's because it's to accommodate the Mesoamerican idea. If they had been more historically accurate, first off, they would not have edited the Wentworth letter, because Joseph Smith specifically told the people, don't change anything in this letter. But if they had done, if they were historically accurate, they would have left the whole Wentworth letter in. But the second thing they would have done is added the footnote about Orson Pratt's pamphlet, so that people could understand the significance of that statement. But they didn't do either one.
Joseph Smith changed Orson Pratt's and put that into the final letter.
Use that to replace the whole Central American stuff. And it's a problem, because most members of the church throughout the world, the only access they have to the Wentworth letter is that lesson manual, which has been translated in all the languages. Because if you don't speak English or read English, the Joseph Smith papers are opaque. It's like they don't exist. I have friends in France and other countries around the world who have never seen the Wentworth letter in its entirety, because the lesson manual is so misleading. So it's, fortunately we can talk about it, and I think I've talked to church historians. They recognize that was probably a mistake to do that, because it was so misleading. And as a result, members of the church around the world have no idea what the actual Wentworth letter said.
Well, luckily that we have more than one account of Joseph Smith.
That's true.
Making these changes and that kind of stuff. And that's the thing that we're going to really go do a deep dive today about, with the Times and Seasons articles and other articles that actually corroborate what you just said about how Joseph Smith was actively taking other people's thoughts and so forth and correcting them away from the Mesoamerican setting to the North American setting. All right, should we continue on?
Continue here.
This is another example of that.
In 1833, Joseph Smith penned a letter to the editor of the American Revivalist and Rochester Observer, in which he describes the Book of Mormon as follows. He wrote this letter, gave it to the editor did what editors do and changed it printed it. Joseph Smith caught word of this and then immediately fired off another letter and basically told the editor that this was received by commandment from God and do not change one word of it. And amazingly, the editor actually put it in then complete. And this is one of the sections that came out of this. The Book of Mormon is a record of the forefathers of our western tribes of Indians. By it we learned that our western tribes of Indians are descendants from that Joseph that was sold into Egypt, and that the land of America is a promised land unto them. Joseph Smith at this time in 1833, where was he? Okay, he was back in further east. He was in New York. And so when they talk about the western tribes of Indians, they're not talking about California or Utah or those areas. The West at that point in time literally was Ohio. It was Missouri. It was Illinois. Those were the areas that were considered to be the West back when Joseph Smith wrote this. And he said that the Book of Mormon is a record of those western tribes of Indians. Joseph Smith's mother also corroborates what Joseph Smith claims.
Before we go,
this is the history of Joseph Smith.
Yeah, up there. Okay.
Let me ask you a question. So how far west do you have to go? If Joseph Smith is in New York and he's talking about the western tribes of Indians, how far west do you have to go to get to Guatemala?
Well, at this point, he was in Kirtland, Ohio, not New York.
Okay.
So it's a little further
So from
west.
Kirtland, okay, it's a little bit further west.
Yeah,
But bottom line is you can't get to Guatemala going west.
No, you can't.
Okay, I just wanted to make that little point.
Yeah.
But anyway, all right.
Well, and the western tribes of Indians were the ones that he sent Oliver Cowdery and Ziba Peterson.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that too, because
we will get to that.
Because this is the thing that I find is interesting, is that there's been claims that there's been no prophets have ever made any revelatory statements involving geography.
Right.
And I don't know where that claim comes from, unless you just ignore the things that we're bringing up from Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
I think that Joseph Smith made it very clear.
Well, it's probably because they read the version of the Wentworth letter in the lesson manual.
Maybe so.
So they didn't know.
Well, I think that in trying to accommodate the Mesoamerican theories, there's a lot of stuff that's been left out that members of the church don't even know.
That's right.
And so they believe this when people say that there's no revelatory anything about geography, when there clearly is. And we're not trying to take issue with the churches in general, but let's just tell the history as it is.
Yeah.
And let the chips fall where they may, and stop worrying about trying to accommodate one, a small handful of people's theory about the Book of Mormon happening in Central America.
Exactly.
All right. Anyway, we'll keep going. Here, this is Lucy Mack Smith, Joseph's mom.
By his mother in 1854 edition, Joseph Smith's mother says this: "From this time forth, Joseph continued to receive instructions from the Lord, and we continued to get the children together every evening for the purpose of listening while he gave us a relation of the same. He would describe the ancient inhabitants of this continent, their dress, the mode of travel, the animals which they rode, their cities and their buildings with every particular, their mode of warfare, also their religious worship. This he would do with as much ease, seemingly as if he had spent his whole life with them." This was all done long before Joseph Smith even had the plates. There were some things that happened in Zion's camp that
We got to stop one more time.
Okay.
We got to talk just a second about Lucy Mack Smith.
Okay, sure.
Okay, so I have an old version of the history of Joseph Smith by his mother. This is this is clear back in 1956, which is before I was born. so this is an old copy of the history of Joseph Smith by his mother, Lucy Mack Smith. Okay. And I actually have.
Well, let me just say something about
please.
that. So books like this, and there's been several that have been published. You have a second one
This is
here.
another one here that I have, which is the collector's edition, Lucy Mack Smith, the history of Joseph Smith by his mother.
And what these are based on is there's actually two versions of her history, and she dictated these. And there's a couple named the Corres who wrote them down. And the first one started after Joseph died in 1844, and she told her son William Smith, who had survived, she said, people ask me about Joseph Smith's life so many times, I'm losing my voice, I'm just going to dictate it once so everybody can have it. So that was the origin of this history. And in 1844 to 1845, she dictated one version, and then they did a second version in 1845 that has a few changes, not a lot of changes, but it has a few changes and additions. And so when people would compile her history like this, they edited a combination of those. Although those weren't actually all that available. Fortunately today, both versions, the handwritten versions, are available in the Joseph Smith papers, and anybody can read them for yourself.
Yeah, thank heaven for the Joseph Smith papers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my goodness. They did a yeoman's job.
And so since we've been here today, I've looked through yours here.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of important omissions from this.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, in both of these.
Yeah.
And it's just because they didn't have access to it, apparently.
But Joseph Smith's mom, I think, is a great testimony of Joseph Smith himself. And I had marked several different things in here about, from the first vision accounts, basically. One of the things I find is fascinating here is an account that she has. She says, he said that there was a book deposited written upon gold plates giving an account of the former inhabitants of this continent, which we've heard before, and the source from whence they sprang. He also said that the fullness of the everlasting gospel was contained in it, as delivered by the Savior to the ancient inhabitants. And also there was 2 stones in silver bowls. This is one of the, I think, probably one of the earlier accounts of the Urim and Thummim as far as the description of it. And these stones fastened to a breastplate constituted what is called the Urim and Thummim, deposited with the plates, and the possession and use of these stones were what constituted seers in ancient or former times. And I love this part. And that God had prepared them for what purpose? He says, for the purpose of translating the book.
That's right.
So the whole reason why God made the Urim and Thummim, got it to the Jaredites, the Jaredites got it to the Nephites got it to Moroni, he got it into the stone box, got it all in there for the purpose that they could be used in translating the plates.
Right. Yeah.
So I find it fascinating that Joseph Smith decided I don't need those.
Well,
not important.
Yeah, except he never did do that.
Yeah, exactly. He didn't do that. Then there's also the account which we already just went through. Basically, this is on. By the way, that was on page. If you have the this collector's edition, it's on page 73, page 79. Pikes talks about the how he would get together with his family.
We can put a link to the Joseph Smith papers in the video.
That'd be the best thing to do, actually, to put that in there.
Because there's so many different versions of this that it's better to go to the original.
Yeah. But basically, just how I just find that fascinating that Joseph Smith, the family would get together. I can kind of imagine here, like a family home evening deal where they're all sitting there. And, okay, Joseph, tell us about the Book of Mormon people, and he'd tell them about the animals that they rode and everything else, and they were just amazed by that. Another part of this I think is interesting is her mention of Cumorah. Yeah. Several different times. You mentioned that in the 2 different versions that she talks about Cumorah 3 times.
Read the one you've got here.
But this one is on page 94, and it says, my husband, supposing that it was from some of the other neighbors, was quite angry and observed, I would like to know what business anybody has to find fault with you.
Well, let's explain the context. So Joseph had gone down to Manchester, which is south of Palmyra, to do an errand. Yeah. And he was late coming home. In fact, he was
kind of or shot at.
No, not on this occasion.
Okay, not this
one. Okay, but he was he came home late. Okay. And they were all stayed up. They were worried about him. They wondered what happened. Yeah. And that's where this came in. Yeah. So he said he was.
What business anybody has to find fault with you?
He had been taken a severe chastisement
that I've ever had in my life.
So on the way home from Manchester, he had taken this severe chastisement. Okay. And that's what led to your reading.
And then he says basically, stop, Father, stop, said Joseph. It was the angel of the Lord as I passed by the hill of Cumorah, where the plates are. The angel met me and said that I had not been engaged enough in the work of the Lord, and the time had come for the record to be brought forth, and that I must be up and doing and set myself about the things which God had commanded me to do. Yeah. So here is Lucy Mack Smith talking about Cumorah, referencing Cumorah.
And this is significant because they knew what hill he was talking about from the name. He didn't have to say it's the largest hill in the country and it's a few miles. He just called it Cumorah naturally, and she remembered it that way. Yeah. What's interesting, this book doesn't have it in there, but there's another passage in her history where she talked about Cumorah. And I happen to have it on my phone handy.
Oh, yeah. We'll
it's right off one of my web pages. Let's do it. But this was, Lucy was explaining what happened the night Moroni first visited. And she said, she just quoted what Joseph had told her. But Moroni said, to Joseph Smith, to prevent you, wait, let's see. Your mind will be filled with darkness, and all manner of evil will rush into your mind to prevent you from keeping the commandments of God. You may not succeed in doing this work. And you must tell your father of this, for he will believe every word you say. We know that part of the account. But then Moroni went on to say this. The record is on a side hill on the hill of Cumorah, 3 miles from this place. Remove the grass and moss, and you will find a large flat stone. Pry that up, and you will find the record under it, laying on 4 pillars of cement. And there's a couple aspects of this that's really significant. Wow. One is that here's Moroni identifying the hill as Cumorah the very first time he met Joseph Smith. You know, there's some scholars, particularly the M2C scholars, I call them, for the Mesoamerican 2 Cumorahs, but the people who promote Mesoamerica say, well, we have no idea where this false tradition of Cumorah in New York started. But Lucy says it started with Moroni. It's right there. And it's not only the
well,
most...
Well, maybe Moroni doesn't know.
Yeah, maybe Moroni. But
where he put the plates.
But he called it the Hill of Cumorah the first time he met Joseph Smith. And that's significant. And it's also the most succinct and clearest origin of the Hill Cumorah in New York, directly from Moroni the first time he met. Later on, we'll talk about how Joseph reaffirmed that later in his life.
Yeah, several times.
But well, one in particular is in the scriptures. But another part of this is that she specifically remembered Joseph telling her that Moroni told Joseph to remove the grass and moss. And that's significant. And underneath, you will find a large flat stone. A lot of times in these pictures or in our imagination, we imagine this big stone sitting out on top of the hill. Yeah, and artists have depicted it that way because they didn't know what Moroni told Joseph Smith. But when you read this, that's the kind of a detail that's an indicia of reliability and credibility. Because you remember that specific detail that others never related. And it makes sense. Later, Oliver Cowdery wrote about this.
Also makes sense why nobody really noticed that rock before.
Yeah,
really,
sure,
because it was pretty much covered.
It's covered with grass and
moss.
Which
makes sense if it's been since 420 A.D.
Exactly.
It's been sitting there on the hill.
You would think that Moroni would have covered it anyway after he buried it there. But so that's the kind of a detail that tells us that Lucy had a good memory, is accurate. She didn't make it up after the fact. And it's also true, the Hill of Cumorah reference corroborates what you just read, that the family called it the Hill of Cumorah. Now the Book of Mormon says the Hill Cumorah, not the Hill of Cumorah, but it was a hill in the land Cumorah also. And so this establishes that the identification of the Hill Cumorah in New York started in September of 1827. Or 1823, I mean. September of 1823. 1827 was the reference you read. And so all those who say, well, people made it up, it was a false tradition and so on, have to reconcile what Lucy Mack remembered. And it's interesting, in this Saints book you've got here, they quote Lucy Mack Smith's history, I think, over 100 times. I counted up one time. But they never mention this. And they never mentioned that one.
And they never even mentioned the word Cumorah.
Yeah, that's right. They don't mention the word
so
Cumorah.
That's an interesting thing. Do you want, I mean, since you brought
that
up,
we can talk.
Let's go ahead and talk about this real quick. Little side note here.
Yeah, this is our favorite book. I did another cover of this that says M2C approved, because the way the editors wrote this was to accommodate the Mesoamerican
Explain M2C just in case anybody doesn't know what that is.
The idea of M2C is an acronym for Mesoamerican / 2 Cumorahs. And the theory is that those who believe the Book of Mormon took place in Central America say that Cumorah in New York is too far away. That's science fiction, John Sorensen said, to say that Cumorah is in New York. So Cumorah, the real Cumorah, has to be in Central America. And even though early church leaders, including Joseph, referred to the hill in New York as Cumorah, that's a fake Cumorah. So there's 2 Cumorahs. That's how they explain it.
And so, I mean, M2C, I mean, it really is an accurate description of what's going on. Because of the M, which is the Mesoamerica, you have 2 Cumorah.
Yeah, where's that lesson manual? We'll look at how that's M2C. And we don't need to belabor this, but the idea, whenever you see a Mayan temple like this,
M2C.
That's the reflection of this theory that there's 2 Cumorahs. That contradicts everything that our early church sources tell us. as well as the teachings of the prophets. So anyway, in this book called The Standard of Truth, which quotes, is it taken from the Wentworth letter itself, they never mention Cumorah, because according to the editors, well, we don't know where Cumorah is. But and yet they quote Lucy Mack Smith over 100 times, but they omit when she talked about Cumorah. So it's easy to not know where things are if you delete what the references are, right? If you manipulate church history to accommodate a Mesoamerican theory by deleting the references, then we've lost that.
In a history book, you should just tell the history and not worry so much about what other people's theories might be. But there's one other issue that I had. And again, I love church history. I have a whole.
Well, before we get to that, let me read one more that she said about Cumorah. So in another part in her history, Lucy said that up to the time when he took the plates out of the stone cement box in the hill of Cumorah, she said also. So 3 times she talked about the hill of Cumorah, which took place the morning that Mr. Knight missed his horse and wagon, and that whole story. So in her history, 3 times she referred to the hill of Cumorah, but yet these guys, our church historians, completely omitted it. And there you are.
We'll give another quick example here when we get into this, but actually revelations given to the Lord, and they changed the wording in the revelations to accommodate again the M2C Mesoamerica thing. Before we get away from Lucy Mack Smith, though, for just a second, I wanted to show this on page 144. She talks about the people which formerly inhabited this continent. They're talking about, again, the Book of Mormon. She also talks about as a translation. She says, "No, gentlemen," said I, "we have no gold Bible, but we have a translation of some gold plates which have been brought forth for the purpose of making known to the world the plainness of the gospel, and also to give a history of the people which formerly inhabited this continent." And again, it can be argued that Mesoamerica is part of the North American continent. Okay, so that's not a real, but it does limit it to North America. But this is also on page 152. Actually, she's talking about this. It starts on page 151. She says, "On the 13th of June, Samuel started on a mission to which he'd been set apart by Joseph, and in traveling 25 miles, which was his first day's journey, he stopped at a number of places in order to sell his books, but was turned out of doors as soon as he declared his principles." Okay, any missionaries out there that ring to you a little bit? Anyway, so when evening came on, he was faint and almost discouraged, but coming to an inn which was surrounded with every appearance of plenty, he called to see if the landlord would buy one of his books. On going in, Samuel inquired of him if he did not wish to purchase a history of the origin of the Indians. So Samuel is telling people that the Book of Mormon is the origin of these Indians. He says, I do not know," replied the host. "How did you get a hold of it?" "It was translated," rejoined Samuel, "by my brother from some gold plates that he found buried in the earth." "You blankety blank liar," cried the landlord. "Get out of my house. You shan't stay 1 minute with your books." But it's interesting because Samuel was also another, a brother of Joseph Smith, and he also believed that was what Joseph's thing was. There's an account in here I just love, and just to shout out, it's an account of the opening of the ice as they were going from Buffalo, New York, down to Fairport Harbor. And
her history is fascinating.
She was a stalwart, I'm telling you.
That's for sure.
Joseph had the perfect mom for him to accomplish his mission. It was awesome. If you get a chance to read the book, it's fantastic. Okay.
Well, let's get one more thing on Moroni calling the hill Cumorah.
Yes.
And that was when Parley Pratt and Oliver Cowdery and Ziba Peterson went on the mission to the Lamanites. And Parley Pratt kept his biography, or his journal, which turned into his autobiography. And in there he quoted something that Oliver Cowdery taught back in 1830 on their mission to the. And he said that Oliver Cowdery was teaching the people, and he said, "This book," hold up a Book of Mormon, "this book which contains these things was hid in the earth by Moroni in a hill called by him Cumorah, which hill is now in the state of New York near the village of Palmyra in Ontario."
So why are we searching for Hill Comoras
that
in
has
Central
been
America.
the most perplexing thing. Well, if we want to talk about the history of it, it started with an RLDS scholar who came up with this, and then the LDS scholars kind of adopted that theory, but they just simply completely rejected what Lucy said, what Oliver said, and even what Joseph Smith said, as we'll get to.
Yeah.
But
Even
isn't it
revelations
interesting
that Joseph Smith had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But isn't it interesting that Oliver Cowdery said it was a hill called by Moroni Cumorah, which is what his Lucy Mack Smith said.
And
also.
he specifically stated it was in New York.
Yeah, now in the state of New York, near the village of Palmyra, in Ontario County. So we all know where that is.
Yeah.
In fact, the house that I owned
pretty much makes M2C.
Yeah. Well, people can believe whatever they want.
That's right. That's right.
And all we're doing is presenting the evidence.
Yeah.
And we've, in my own experience,
this is historically documented evidence. This isn't just our opinions about this.
Exactly.
This is what was said by those closest to Joseph Smith.
That's right. And we feel like, at least in my case, as I said earlier, with comparing myself with Kay's experience, once I learned this history, then it made sense. Mm-hmm. And that's when I started saying, well, why did we ever look in Central America? And we're going to eventually get to that point.
Yes.
But, but I think most people are interested to know what the real history is, and you're not going to get it in the Saints book. Yeah. You're not going to get it in the writings of, well, you're not even going to get it in the lesson.
I really think this is going to be one of the first times people are going to be able to get a deep dive on this.
I think so.
That is fully corroborated. We can show you the actual documented accounts and where you can go to find them. You don't have to believe us.
That's right.
And then you find out for yourself, and you decide. What did Joseph Smith really know? Because I mean, I call this whole thing Joseph knew for a reason.
That's right.
Okay.